friends, welcome to another Friends of France Tuesday. Please send me your congratulations because I just survived the coldest weekend of the past few years here in New York City. It was about 1 degree Fahrenheit on Saturday and Sunday, but the weather app was classifying it as it feels like negative 12 degrees, and I agree. On Saturday night, I actually went out into the city to meet a friend visiting out of town, and then I went all the way to Flushing to celebrate my friend's birthday. And it was so cold. I thought my hands were going to fall off. I thought my ears were going to fall off. But that night in Flushing, we had such a hearty and warm Korean barbecue dinner, and it was beautiful. Sharing the space and spreading body heat with your friends, sharing our weekly tea and stories, and then singing happy birthday to our friend. It's just so beautiful how hearing your friend's voice just makes you instantly feel better and feel warm inside. It's just beautiful to be able to hear, period. And of course, this sense of hearing that many of us just live our lives without thinking much about it is indeed a privilege and luxury for others. And in this episode, we talk more about that. In last week's episode, we were joined by my dear friend, Dr. Chris Park, from the world of ENT, or ears, nose, and throat. We briefly touched upon the sense of hearing, but primarily in the context of earwax and general noise. But we didn't really delve too deeply into the pathologies and issues of the sense of hearing itself. The sense of hearing is a finely tuned collaboration between physics and biology, transforming invisible sound waves into meaning, memory, and emotion. From the delicate mechanics of the middle ear to the neural pathways that help us localize danger, recognize voices, and enjoy music, hearing quietly shapes how we connect with the world. I am beyond honored to be joined today by an expert guest who has the most credibility to speak all about the sense of hearing and associated hearing loss in itself. Beyond her educational justification, she herself was born hard of hearing and lives to tell the story of living with it. It's such a treat to be joined today by Dr. Stacey Lim, an American Speech Language Hearing Association certified audiologist and Professor of Audiology. Dr. Lim received her Bachelor of Arts in Communication Sciences and Disorders and German Language and Literature from Mercer College, her Doctor of Audiology degree from Northeast Ohio AUD Consortium at the University of Akron, and her PhD in Audiology from Kent State University. Currently, Dr. Lim is a Professor of Audiology at Central Michigan University, holds a Certificate of Clinical Competence in Audiology from ASHA, and is a researcher focused on cochlear implants and oral rehabilitation, informed by her personal experience of bilateral, profound, sensorineural hearing loss since birth. Previously, Dr. Lim was a Fulbright Scholar at the Ludwig Maximilian University of Munich in Germany, studying hear loss in the German population, a co-principal investigator in March of Dimes research in cognitive and linguistic skills related to hearing loss, and the chapter president at the Alexander Graham Bell Association for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. Dr. Lim is also a co-curator of Disabled Beauty, a museum exhibition featuring creatively designed adaptive devices, assistive devices, and apparel for people with disabilities. What a true honor. Okay, listen up to some sound advice. Get it? Okay, let's go. Do you get red after a sip of alcohol? Well, I do, and it actually has a name. The alcohol flush reaction, and in my case, the infamous Asian glow. But something I didn't realize is that Asian glow isn't just a cosmetic issue, it's a real health risk, linked to increased cancer risk and poor alcohol metabolism. Thankfully, Join is here to help, an AAPI and woman-founded supplement brand that was created to be the most effective natural solution to support people with alcohol flush and recovery, while boosting overall health. Made with clinically studied, all-natural ingredients like glutathione, milk thistle, and B vitamins, you can now finally feel confident when you drink. Get 20% off your first order at jointhefun.com. That's JOYNTHEFUN.com with the code FRANZ. That's FRANZ. Let's give the Asian glow a different meaning. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Friends of France podcast, and I've been so excited and looking forward to introduce our special guest today and our special topic. It's one that I've been dreaming of talking about in the podcast since it started actually, And so we're finally here with just the perfect person to join me today, Dr. Stacey Lim. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
So Dr. Stacey Lim, she's a doctor of audiology. She's an audiologist, and also you have a PhD in audiology. You are the master of the master, the expert of the expert in our conversation today. Throughout the 5 years of the podcast, we talked about different medical specialties, different systems of the body, different parts of the body, different conditions of the body. Even on this season, we had otolaryngologist on, an ENT on. We talked about the ears, the nose, the throat. But then I realized that, wait, there's one sense that we haven't really touched upon. I've had a dentist on, I've had a neurologist on, I've had everyone on from, someone who was a chef. So we talked about the taste of food and tasting. We talked about, smelling and just touching, tactile stimulation. There's one sense that I haven't really touched upon, and that's on me. But today we're going to go all about it. We're going to talk about all about the sense of hearing today. But before all of that, I wanted our audience to know about your beautiful story of how you stumbled and got into this field of audiology. And if you could just introduce yourself to everyone. Thank you so much.
My name is Stacey Lim. I am an audiologist, and how I got into this field actually started shortly after I was born. I was actually born with a profound hearing loss in both ears, way before the time of newborn hearing screening. So my mom, I would say about 6 weeks after I was born, my mom knew that I wasn't hearing. And so she took me to the pediatrician and told the pediatrician, hey, my daughter's not hearing me. And she had been doing all these home tests, with passing pan, staying a pattern pan by my dad. My dad would wake up and I would do the same thing and I wouldn't wake up. So it took some time, but the pediatrician finally, I think, probably took more than a few months to kind of listen to my mom and be like, okay, you know what? I'm going to send you to the audiologist, but I know Stacey's hearing is not fine. And of course, my hearing was not fine. I had my hearing evaluated when I was still a baby, and maybe 8 months, I think. And then, my mom and dad were like, what do you do now? There's really no internet, 1980, maybe. So there's no internet, so my dad had to go to the library and read up on hearing loss, read up on whatever you could find. In the meantime, they were getting my hearing tested by so many people, multiple people. They went to a university near where I grew up, State University in Ohio, and they were supposed to see a professor there. So the professor missed the meeting, but there was a graduate student there named Carol Foxer, and she tested my hearing. And of course, I still had a hearing loss. So of course, my mom started crying, and she's like, don't worry. There's a place in Colorado where kids who are deaf can talk. And by coincidence, my dad had a business trip to Denver the next week. So he went there and he saw the kids were ready to move us all to Colorado. So the clinic was like, no, there's a place near you in Pennsylvania where you can go. My dad took girls actually speech language pathologist with them to Pennsylvania to learn how to teach me to speak. So this is a really cool story because at that time, there was a therapist, a speech language pathologist at that clinic. My parents were observing, and he was teaching a little boy how to speak using English hearing. So you fast forward many years later. 15 years later, when I'm in high school, I was convinced I was going to be either an interior decorator or an architect or something. And I was in the Philippines. Actually, Mom and I and this person who is now a professor at the College of Worcester in Ohio, named Don Goldberg. We were invited to the Philippines to give a presentation about the auditory verbal approach, which is an approach that is used to teach kids who are deaf or hard of hearing how to speak using their hearing. And at that time, there was an ENT, an ear, nose, and throat doctor who stood up in front of everyone, and he said children who were born profoundly deaf will never learn to speak or hear. And I'm sitting there 15 years old, and I'm going, I'm profoundly deaf, and I can speak, and I can hear, and I'm going to be an audiologist. And I decided I want to be an audiologist because I felt like, with my parents, when they went through so much to try and figure out what to do with me, and they were not really given a whole lot of really good information or a lot of really good resources. They had to go out and look for these resources to try and figure out how do I go to teaching to communicate with other people before they found one that fit them. So my goal was to eventually become a pediatric audiologist, and because I wanted to make sure parents were given all the information so they could make the best choice for their child, and to make sure they had all the different options and ways kids with hearing loss would communicate. And that is how I became an audiologist.
Oh, it's so beautiful. The story, each time I read it and I hear it, my heartstrings are just pulled. It's a different type of degree of empathy, right? That I'm sure you possess for your patients, right? Since you have gone through it and you do go through it yourself. Even myself, I had a cardiac ablation, I think 2016, because I had an arrhythmia at that time. And, I've been working as a cardiology nurse for the past 6 or 7 years. So each time I see a patient and they're kind of afraid or fretful for a procedure or a new diagnosis, it's like there's just this sense of connection of like, I understand. And I'm sure it's the same for you, right?
Yeah, it is. It absolutely is. Because, there are times when I have patients with families who come in and they're like, I don't want hearing aids because they make me look old. And I'm like, no, I'm not old. And I'll be like, well, no, I have hearing aids too. And I have patients who will come see me because I have a hearing loss. Because there's connection, they feel like they understand what you're going through. And that representation is really powerful. When you see people like you who are in the field, working the profession that we are seeing, it is really powerful. And I feel like people open up a lot more to you. And they're
Yeah.
more willing to share the challenges they have. And they're more willing to accept maybe the ideas you might have and actually learn from them. Because sometimes they use or they know about technology that I don't know yet, like
Yeah.
especially at job or that kind of thing. It's really good for me to kind of see what those experiences are, because it really allows me to try them out. And then, like, hey, if they're great, then I can recommend them to my
Yeah.
other patients.
Yeah, definitely. Well, so, as we're talking about now about your experience and your history and your profession, I guess our audience and our listeners have a gist of what an audiologist is. But for those who may not know or so may not understand, briefly, what is audiology? What is this study in this field all about?
So in this field, what we're doing, we are studying hearing and balance. I am much more in the hearing stuff. There are people who specialize in the balance. Do that is not my area of specialty. But we are the people that if you feel like you have trouble hearing or you're having a harder time understanding people, we'll give you a hearing evaluation. And we can kind of basically see the graphic you're hearing is. You can kind of see what area or what frequencies your pictures you might have more difficulty hearing or understanding people, and how loud we need to make things for you. Then we can also work with different kinds of hearing technology, like hearing aids or Cochlear, assistive listening devices, or ASHA integrated hearing devices. But on the balance side, we can evaluate your balance and kind of see what organ or what might be causing you to feel dizzy or have vertigo. And some will work alongside a vestibular rehabilitationist to try and help you regain or compensate for the balance issue that you might be having.
Yeah, I'm curious. So when someone is having balance or hearing issue, how then does one, I guess, decide or differentiate, or is there a right person to go to between an audiologist and, let's say, an ENT physician?
For the ENT is more the medical side of things. So if we wanted to find out, if there's something physically wrong, so like what we're doing, we're kind of looking at the perception. But then we are helping that diagnostic process to see what is going on. We see a concern that we think needs an ENT visit. For example, this is probably the right time of year, like fall and winter. I got to see a lot of little kids who feel their school hearing screening. And a lot of the time that has to do with like maybe they have middle ear infection or otitis media. And if it's something that is an ongoing problem, then that would be something where I would send them to an ENT for management. Or if they have some concern that I might see like maybe one ear hears up way much better than the other ear. And I would definitely send them to an ENT to make sure there's nothing medical that is causing that difference in hearing.
Yeah, no, that's beautifully put. Now that we're talking about the study of hearing, I feel like the way the body works is just so interesting. A previous episode, we have an optometrist on, and she talked about how we see how vision actually works. And it's just a cascade of steps that just microscopically happens in our body. The receiving and the perception, the refraction of light, and that's how we see, and we take it for granted, right? I guess for the general public, How does the sense of hearing happen? Like, what actually happens in our ears that causes us to actually have that sense of hearing?
And that's a pretty fun topic to talk about, I think. But what happens is, your ear, what we typically think of as our ear, or most people think of is the outer ear, where you put your earring on, you put your and your eyeglasses on them and all that. What that is your pinna, and it collects the sound in the environment. So if we think about like a satellite dish, it kind of collects all of that information and it funnels it down to the ear canal, the opening of the ear canal, and the sound will travel all the way down to the ear canal and will hit the eardrum or the tympanic membrane. And that tympanic membrane will vibrate with the various frequency and intensity of the sound that is traveling through. That vibration of the eardrum will cause the three small bones in the ear, the axial, also known as the hammer, anvil, and stirrup. What they do is they convert all of that acoustic energy that's been collected by your pinna into mechanical energy, kind of like the piston of a car. I'm not a car person, but that's the best analogy I've heard. That the pistons of a car, they're converting all of that energy into mechanical energy. And that very last bone in that circular chain is called the stapes or the stirrup, and it rocks back and forth into the cochlea. The cochlea is the organ of hearing. That really, if you look at a picture of the inner part of the ear, it looks kind of like a snail. And that cochlea is filled with fluid and hair cells. And what happens is when the stapes rock in and out of the oval window of the cochlea, it causes the fluid in the cochlea to move and have what are called hair cells in your cochlea. They are not the same kind of hairs you see on your head. They're actually sensory cells. And what happens is the fluid will cause the hair cells to move and bend and shear. And what happens is because of the different kinds of fluid that are in your cochlea, so they spark that reaction and that chemical reaction. And that will go down to your auditory neuron and down to the auditory nerve. And that auditory nerve will travel up to the brainstem and just trigger the whole bunch of events throughout the entire brain, all the way up to the auditory cortex. And what happens at that point is your brain puts meaning to that sound. Associated with a person's voice, associated with music, emotion, and maybe at a lower in the brainstem level, even like telling the location of where the sound is coming from. So there are all these different things that are happening in your brain. Super cool.
What if a single cup of tea could hold a century of stories? Day Tea is a 5-generation family business crafting award-winning high-mountain oolong teas in Taiwan since 1918. Grown at the highest elevations, every leaf is hand-picked, all-natural, and nurtured without additives or herbicides. The result is an array of complex flavors that evolve with each steep, honored at tasting competitions in France and Japan. From premium loose leaf and tea bags to ready-to-drink cold brew bottles, every sip is an invitation to slow down, savor, and connect. Discover tea as it's meant to be experienced. Use code FRANZ, that's FRANZ, for 10% off at daytea.co. That's DAETEA.co. Valid until February 14, 2026. Brew it hot, brew it cold. Take a moment for you. How do you know when something actually tastes good to an Asian person? When they say, it's not too sweet. And that's precisely what Wild Mannered set out to do. Founded by two childhood best friends who were tired of drinks that were too sweet, too artificial, and left them with worse hangovers. Wild Mannered is an Asian American founded brand focused on bridging people together with all-natural, shareable soju cocktails. With flavors like strawberry basil, cucumber lime mint, and pineapple ginger, every sip is made with the real fruits and botanicals and perfectly balanced at a lighter 13% ABV. Refreshing, smooth, and never too sweet. Get 10% off your first order with code FRANZ, that's FRANZ, at drinkwildmannered.com, or hit the store locator to find them in stores across New York City. Make your next get-together a little more wild-mannered. It's just a beautiful process, and it's one that we take for granted at most times, that so many parts of our body are working all together to produce the sense. But the body is not perfect as we know it, and many things happen and can go wrong, can go awry, or may not be up to par with how we want it. So I guess within the context of the sense of hearing, what are the common issues that we encounter? Like, how do they happen? What's the cause?
Well, I think hearing loss is probably the big thing, one of the most common cause of disabilities in this country. And there are so many different causes. And I think for a lot of population, I see one of the big ones is, of course, aging. As we got older, we begin to lose some of the hearing.
Mm-hmm.
And other ones are like noise exposure, or some people are born with hearing loss, like myself. Basically, every 1,000 babies is born with profound hearing loss. It's a common enough issue that can affect a large number of people. They're estimating, I want to say by 2035, I might be wrong there, they're estimating about 50 million people in this country will have hearing loss. And it is something that happens across all different age groups and for a variety of different reasons. I think that's kind of where we start. And then, of course, the kids who go to school and they get ear infection and they can't hear as well.
Yeah. And I think another one too that sometimes I experience, and a part of me is like, should I get worried? Is the ringing in the ear. Exactly what is it? And when does it get worrisome versus it's just it's nothing?
Tinnitus?
Yes.
And that's very common, definitely, a ringing in the ear. And quite a bit of people have it. I think most people throughout their lifetime have experienced an episode of tinnitus. And sometimes it's a really brief thing that happens, a couple of seconds, you never hear it again. It's not going to be problematic. But what happens is that for some people, it's much more problematic. And when it starts bothering you enough that you can't concentrate or you can't sleep, I would say that's a really big concern. Or if it's only 1 year, or if you're a kid and you're in school, maybe one tinnitus is something where you cannot understand your teacher is distracting you from your teacher. And that's going to be very different than in that kind of questioning, trying to figure out what might be an issue. But if it's getting you to the point where you are really annoyed by it, if you cannot concentrate, if you can't sleep, if you're having some really severe mental health issues aligned with it, I would say you definitely should get it evaluated. If it's annoying you enough, we can go see an audiologist. We can kind of start with that process and kind of see if there's something that we can help with, or there's something that might be an underlying issue where you would have to go see an ENT.
That's so good to know. Yeah, so you've been mentioning a lot about hearing loss. I'm curious, are there different types of hearing loss? And I guess in the topic of deafness, is hearing loss and deafness in the same category? Are they different? Are they the same thing?
Well, hearing loss is kind of an all-encompassing term. And it's actually kind of an interesting term because there are a couple of different ways to look at it. There's a medical definition, and a lot of the medical definition kind of tend to fall under people who cannot hear anything without any kind of hearing device. But there are also people who have a cultural definition of deafness, where they belong to the deaf community, and that is part of their identity, not a medical thing. So it's kind of a larger issue here. But when you're talking about hearing loss or deafness, there are different kinds as well. So you have kinds that are conductive hearing loss, where the problem is the outer or the middle ear. So an example would be you on a regular day have typical hearing, but then you got a really bad ear infection. And now the fluid in the middle ear space is preventing the eardrum and the apical from moving the way they should be. So essentially acting kind of like an earplug in your ear. So sound is not going to go through very well. Whereas if you have a sensory neural hearing loss, the problem lies within the cochlea, the organ of hearing, or further up, like maybe in the neural components of your auditory system, like the auditory nerve or the brain, or along that pathway. Now, the problem there is going to be a little bit different because conductive hearing loss can be more treatable medically in most cases. Like if somebody who has chronic ear infection, maybe they would have some kind of antibiotic to clear it up, or maybe they've had enough ear infection, then maybe they start thinking about tubes in their ear. And that would help alleviate some of those issues. Since you're neural hearing loss, we are quite away from curing it all. I know there have been some genetic research that kind of came out for a very certain type of genetic hearing loss related to auditory neuropathy, but it's very specific. gene. And they've been seeing some really interesting, pretty promising results with that. But that doesn't mean that you can cure all deafness. It's a very specific disorder with a very specific genome. But that cannot be like medically cured. But we can help manage.
Yeah. And when it comes to management, you mentioned also before different devices and assistive devices, I guess when it comes to aiding with that, right? For new patients, how do you explain the differences between the hearing aid and cochlear implants and other assistive devices that we have available?
Yeah, so hearing aid is basically something that can be used for mild or profound hearing loss. I kind of like have described it kind of like having a loudspeaker in the ear. So what they do is they take the sound, they can amplify it loud enough for you to hear. Of course, it will go to an audiologist. They will have it fit into your prescription so you're not over amplifying the parts that you don't need amplified, but they're giving you enough of amplification or loudness in the areas where you have more difficulty hearing. A cochlear implant is not for everyone. You have to have a very specific type of hearing loss. You have to have a sensory neural hearing loss. And you have to have a certain level of severity of hearing loss. It is a medical procedure. So that one you have to go to a surgeon and have it implanted into your ear. What it does, it completely bypasses the outer and the middle ear and directly stimulates the auditory nerve. Well, the auditory neuron, and basically you are hearing a little bit differently through the electrical stimulation. So what happens in this case is that you are not worrying about, if you have a sensory neural hearing loss, you have some sort of problem with your, for example, maybe they're missing or they're dead. And if they're missing or they're dead, they're not going to be able to stimulate anything there with the hearing aid. But you have a cochlear implant and you're assuming that the auditory nerve fibers are still there and still present. They can be stimulated. Now, having said that, the sound of a hearing aid is going to be very different than the sound of a cochlear implant, especially in the beginning. And I can say that because I've got both. With a cochlear implant, it's going to take some time for your brain to learn how to listen again with that new signal, because now it's electric hearing. Your brain all of a sudden going, oh, there's something better than her. It sounds a little bit different here. Well, that's different for some people. But your brain is so cool that it actually takes that electrical signal and begin to make sense of it and understand, especially some really good rehabilitation auditory practice and auditory training. You can't just put it on and go out there. You got to practice in some way because you have to retrain your brain. The hearing is going to kind of amplifies everything and it can fit any range of hearing.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier that, some people may be wary of wearing hearing aids because it makes them look old or just, some people just don't want it to be showing. It kind of reminds me of like, those colostomy bags that people have and people want to hide it. People have different levels of altered confidence when it comes to assistive devices, right? Or even implants that may be external, which is why it's so interesting that you kind of delve into fashion as well when it comes to these assistive devices. But I'm very interested about fashion and I know you are as well. Can you tell us more about how you utilize fashion when it comes to these assistive devices?
Yeah, so this is actually really cool. Well, when I was working my PhD, I had to take a stat class. So basically required to take statistics, several of them. And in, I think, my very first stat class, and I had a lot of time between a couple of my classes about a knitting project with me to work on for like half an hour before my class. Other student came down and just sat next to me and said, "This is really cool. What are you making?" It turned out that I found Tamika Ellington was at the time a student studying, she was working on a PhD. Her background is in fashion. And we became super good friends. And we were like, we really, really like each other. And this is something I always tell people. If you are working in like research or anything, or basically any kind of field, if there's somebody you like, kind of think about how can we work together. And we're like, well, no, I mean, audiology and you're in fashion, those are like two totally different kinds of worlds. And what can we do? How can we work together? Because I like you. I want to do something with you. And so our very first project was actually a research project looking at teenagers who have hearing loss and their perception of their hearing devices and what they wish their hearing devices were like. And that was our very first project. And we went to a fashion and health symposium at a fashion conference, and we heard this talk by the other professor, I guess, but looking at like prosthetic limbs in fashion, and know like Alexander McQueen had a model, Amy Mullins, who's actually a Paralympian, and she a double amputee. And he designed some really gorgeous prosthetic limbs for her. So we started looking into this, like, we're like, wow, this is really cool. Why is there not? Well, we started really looking and seeing there was this whole other world, I guess, of people who are designing and creating different kinds of fashionable assistive devices, clothing, or prosthesia for people with disabilities. And this would be clothing or maybe like wheelchair covers. People who are working on hearing aid stuff, making them really blinged out or whatever, or canes and walkers and all of this stuff. So there's this whole wall of people who are making fashion more accessible and inclusive to people who have disabilities. And to me, that was pretty exciting. And we started thinking, well, we're going to have a museum exhibition. Kent State University has the largest hearing aid museum in the world, I believe. And I got to walk by it every day because that's where my classes were. And our original vision was to have pull out from the coolest pieces from that exhibition and display them at the fashion museum at Kent State, because Kent State has a fashion museum there. But we started thinking, well, maybe we can show more stuff. Maybe we can show like clothing and wheelchairs and everything. So we dreamed it, we made it happen, and the website is still up. And we had like amazing exhibition with really creative stuff. And I think it's really important because it really showed people that disability doesn't need to be hidden. There happen ways people try to disguise it. There's some really interesting hearing aid stuff where people try to incorporate the hearing aid into jewelry so it's hidden, or in the bras and that kind of thing. Or maybe for certain kinds of hearing loss, headbands, eyeglasses. We're coming back to eyeglasses again. The new AI tech, I'm kind of seeing it come back again. And there's some really neat stuff, how we can combine that technology and wearability.
Yeah, definitely. Inclusion and representation is so important, especially, in the public eye. I watched a fashion show for New York Fashion Week, and one of the designers in the collective show, I think it was Emi Jingu, is the name of the brand. All of her models also had disabilities. Some were in wheelchairs, some were upper and lower extremity amputees. So it's just a beautiful thing to see, the inclusion and representation in that space. I feel like representation is also such a big topic in our conversation today. One of my favorite actresses, Viola Davis, she once said that representation is the physical manifestation of someone's dreams, because it's just not a concept, oh, I think I can do it. No, it's a reality and it's a proof that you can. So that's why I think it's so beautiful, and that's why I love your story as well, and hearing your story and your experience, because it's such a beautiful thing for people to know, and I believe more people should hear about it.
Tired of health fads and fleeting trends? Reprise Health takes wellness back to its roots, back to all natural remedies that have truly stood the test of time. Reprise is a holistic wellness brand bringing the ancient wisdom of traditional Eastern medicine into the modern world. Their daily gummies feature ancient Asian superfoods like ginseng, turmeric, and reishi mushrooms that are proudly sourced from KPC herbs, trusted by acupuncturists and herbalists for over 100 years. Whether to help you rest, focus, de-stress, or sleep, bring centuries of wisdom into your everyday health for 15% off at reprisehealth.com. That's REPRISE health.com with the code FRANZ. That's FRANZ. One-time use and cannot be combined with other codes. Ancient wisdom, modern remedy. What if your routine felt less like a chore and more like a ritual? Rooted in Japan since 1946, Uka Beauty creates everyday practices that remind us beauty isn't just how you look, but how you feel. At the heart of their mission is regenerative beauty, from ingredients that restore biodiversity to refillable, circular packaging that reduces waste. Their iconic Scalp Kanzen brush transforms scalp care into full-body relief, easing headaches, boosting circulation, and releasing jaw tension. And with innovative shampoos, nail oils, and serums, Uka restores balance and vitality with timeless Japanese sensibility and craftsmanship. Join the mission of turning care into impact. In collaboration with Ram Spa, you can get 15% off your first order at ukabeauty.com. That's UKAbeauty.com with the code FRANZ. That's FRANZ. One-time use only and cannot be combined with other codes.
We talked a lot so far about the field of audiology and the incredible sense of hearing and how it happens and, hearing loss and assistive devices. There's a lot of common questions when it comes to hearing, and we got some questions sent in from some of our listeners. So I'm just going to tag on your expertise and ask you the answer to these questions. Now, this is one thing for me too. I have the AirPods, the Apple AirPods, and I don't know what this new iOS update, it stops in the middle of a song to give me an alert that says you have to turn down your AirPods. You're listening too quickly. So now my question is this. Is there such thing as something is too loud when listening to music with our earphones?
Yes, there are actually levels that are dangerous to your hearing. Obviously, your hearing, once it's gone, it's not going to come back. So you want to really take care of your hearing. And I know it's a really hard thing when you say, especially the younger people, because we're young. We don't think about what it's going to be like when you're 80 and having a hard time. But yes, listening to levels of noise, especially for longer, sustained period of time, can actually be really damaging to the hair cells in your cochlea. And though we're not going to come back, we're a long way from your hair cell regeneration. They've been working on it for like decades. And I don't think so. Maybe one day, maybe when I'm old and retired, maybe that will be a thing. Or maybe never. I don't know. I might be gone. Who knows? But I know they've been working on it for a long time. But I would just say protect your hearing.
Is there a specific level that we should be cautious of?
I would say about like 80 decibels, kind of like the higher level you can go. The higher that level you go, shorter that amount of time you can listen to. So we think about, if you go to a concert and it's very loud, a lot of them are pretty loud because the closer you get to the speaker, and some of them got way above that 80 dB, 85 dB. So you want to really protect that hearing as much as you can.
Yeah, so true or false, we should always wear earplugs when attending a concert.
That would be awesome. That would be fantastic. If you go to concert, you can actually, if you wanted to, you can actually go to your audiologist and have custom-made earplugs. So that way you can still hear some of those frequencies. They're called musician ear or musician earplugs. So you can actually talk with your audiologist and see if you can have ones that are made for musicians. They still allow you to hear some of those frequencies, but kind of dampen it down a little bit so it matter.
That is so interesting. Okay, true or false, noise-induced hearing loss can happen from a single exposure to an explosion or very loud sound.
Yes, it can absolutely happen. In some cases, maybe a firecracker went off by your ear, or maybe the tire of a car not explodes or something. You're in the military and you're wearing some armed combat, and we have what we call, those are called acoustic shock incident, and that can really cause a sudden hearing loss due to the intensity of that sound, and that can definitely happen.
Now, there's this question about when it comes to different noises, I guess, or different sounds that we hear. So true or false, turning down the bass in your headphones protect your hearing more than lowering the overall volume. Is that true?
Not true. So what happened is lowering the bass actually gives you the perception of lowering the overall volume, because when the bass is responsible for a lot of volume that of the music, but the higher frequency sound provide also have a lot of information. What you want to do is you want to lower the entire volume, even though it's going to sound a little bit softer there. It's going to overall be better for protecting your hearing if you turn down the whole thing.
I see. This is also good to know, and these are questions that I had for myself as well. Each time I go to a concert, okay, I must admit, before when I used to go to concerts, I've always had this good friend, and he will always give me earplugs, and he'll be like, you should put this on. And I remember when I was like, no, I don't need it. And they're like, no, you need it. So I've learned my lesson. Now, we've talked so much about hearing, and it's such a beautiful conversation. And one thing that I wanted to go back to what you said, which is so beautiful, I guess, especially when it comes to healthcare and when we seek care, a lot of the times, well, the one who's experiencing the condition is not the only one that's affected, right? It's also their loved ones, their family members. So I'm curious, how can loved ones best support someone who's losing their hearing or do have hearing loss?
I think one of the biggest things, I think for me, is all the communication. communication. We always say, you have to go see the audiologist or go have your hearing checked. But I think the biggest one is communication. So I think really, making sure that you are supporting that communication. It could be something like making sure that they see you. You're not shouting at them. You're not over exaggerating your speaking. So my example would be I've had people who, when they meet me, and I'm like, you know what? I didn't hear you hard of hearing. Well, I have a hearing loss, so I'm deaf, whatever. And they go, oh, I'm sorry. That doesn't help because that's not how we speak, and it takes more work to try and understand that. But not just saying no, they say what? Because we can repeat the same thing, but also think about different kinds of communication strategy. Like maybe you can slow down a little bit. A really good example, I heard another audiologist say, speak like Alexa. And another audiologist named Angela Alexander, he gave that really great explanation. He said you speak clearly, but if you can speak like you're speaking to Siri or Alexa, you have to speak a little bit slower and more distinctly. That's a really good way to think about how you can make sure you're clearly speaking, making sure they see you, or making sure you're having dinner. Maybe making sure it's not in a noisy place, make sure their lighting is good enough that they can see you. So there are so many communication strategies out there. If they have technology, like if they got hearing aids with a remote microphone, they can wear that little microphone and they would be able to hear them directly through the hearing aid. Maybe if they're comfortable using apps and stuff, there's some really great transcription apps for phones that can help in a pinch. So there are all kinds of things. So people can always shoot me an email. I'm always happy to go over strategy and communication stuff with them, or send you links to a place where you can look up different things. But I would just say the biggest thing is communication. Because that is the heart of what we do as audiologists. We want to make sure people still maintain the communication with their loved one.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. Dr. Lim, it has been such a pleasure and such an honor to hear and learn from you and just listen to your story. And I'm so excited for everyone to hear it and the people who are listening to our story right now. So I'm so honored. Thank you so much for joining me.